Hello class, let's take a look at another example of sampling so that way we can hopefully understand the differences between some of the ones that I know people have trouble with, which are cluster and stratified. And we'll experience a few other things. So in any case, here's a problem that we can take a look at. It says, imagine you work for an airline company and wish to give a satisfaction survey. Certainly you can do a census, which is, if you recall, everyone, but you decide to save time and paper by performing a random sample instead. So here is a seat map for one of the planes flown on Philippine Airlines. So here we notice that the plane is broken up into different sections, and as we know, there's a lot of other things that can possibly affect our satisfaction when making a flight. So question 1 on this just says, what are some variables that exist on the plane map above that may influence a passenger's satisfaction level in terms of experience on the flight? And so maybe we might think about, the section that they're in. Or maybe, I know one thing that a lot of people really care about is where their seat is located, meaning did they have an aisle seat versus a window seat versus a middle seat. So this might be one possible thing that really affects someone's satisfaction. Another thing that we might notice is usually towards the front of the plane is the fact that that's where all the first class passengers are business class. So that might be the other thing, maybe the class or cabin that someone is staying in. So first versus business versus coach or economy. Right? And, obviously there's a lot of other things that we can think of. If you're close to an exit, if you're close to the bathroom, all these things may influence passengers. But here's a good list already that we came up with. So imagine now, it says, describe how you might perform just a simple random sample. So remember, what a simple random sample is just the most basic way we can get our sample. So let's just come up with a number. Let's just say we want to sample 20 people on this plane. Maybe one thing we might do is we might give every seat a number. And then we might then use like a random number generator, like on our calculator or on a computer, to select 20 numbers. So RNG standing for random number generator. And of course, then we'll just give the survey to those 20 seats, to the guests sitting in those 20 seats. And so that's an SRS. Now notice, in this method, everyone has an equal chance of being chosen. That's what makes it random. But we don't have any groups or anything like that, so really any set of 20 passengers can be selected. So now let's take a look at the ones that we know that people have trouble with. That's cluster and stratified. So why do people struggle with these two? Is because both of these end up having to use some kind of grouping system. And how we set up our groups is something that we always want to kind of think about as well. Now, the way I like to think about these, though, is like, what's the key difference between cluster and stratified? And it's the fact that stratified, every group has representation. So when we are doing a stratified, a lot of times we want to group them in a way where within each group, they're what we call homogeneous, meaning they're all the same in some way that we think might affect their response on a survey. So all of these things right here that we talked about that on question 1 that may affect their experience on the flight, those would make good groups. So for example, I might use the aisle, window, middle seat, right? So I'm going to actually start off with number 4, whether they have an aisle, window, or middle seat. So it says, describe how you might perform it. Which variable listed in number 1 might you use as your strata? Well, we would use the aisle, window, and middle seat groups as our strata. So that means we have 3 strata in this case. One is the aisle strata, that's the aisle group. The window strata is the window group, and the middle strata is the middle group, the middle seat group. So remember, the word strata just means group. It's just what we call these things is stratified. And now, how would I actually perform a stratified sample? So again, let's assume that I want 20 people. Well, actually, let's make it easier for this case. Let's, 20 people. And also, just based on this, we're not going to worry too much about being proportional, even though that is something, but I'm not quite sure how many of each seat there is. But we kind of want to keep that in mind. But let's assume that all of them are about the same number of seats. Equal number aisle, equal number middle, and equal number of window seats. So maybe I might say something if I want 20 seats. We might give each seat a number. A1, A2, and so on until we get all the aisle seats. Then also W1, W2, till we get all of the window seats. And then M1, M2, all the way until we get all of the middle seats. And then I want to make sure every group gets representation. So I would use a random number generator. And select let's say, I'll do, even though we wanted 20, we'll do 21. 7 aisle seats. 7 window seats. And 7 middle seats. So notice, every single group, the aisle, the window, and the middle, all have representation in this survey. This is what makes it stratified. The reason why we would want this is because if they might have different experiences, we want to hear from every single group. And so stratified will actually help us in reducing the amount of variation that we see because of that. So of course, just like last time, we'll give the survey to each of those selected. So now, how is this going to be different from cluster? Is when we're doing our cluster method, we kind of want to think about this in terms of, how we can make our groups already kind of mixed together. Because one thing about the cluster method is not every group has representation. So the way we choose our clusters or our groups, we want to hopefully make it in a way where no matter which group I choose, there's not going to be much of a difference, or at least we would think there might not be much of a difference between those groups. So actually, it says variables listed in number 1, but hopefully we don't choose one of these things because I have a feeling that each of these will actually affect the way they might respond. So let's think of a different way of choosing our clusters. So going back to the group right here. So maybe I'll ignore section A and B for right now, just because those are like first in business class and may have a different experience. But let's say I want to do a cluster sample for just everyone in the economy class. Well, maybe one thing I might use as my clusters are the row numbers, right? Each one of these rows will have will already be kind of mixed together. In each one of them will have an aisle, window, and middle seat. And so if we're looking, or basically all of these are being represented. So I would assume that all of these clusters, maybe they're going to actually be the same, or at least similar in their experience. And so we don't need to sample all the clusters. Maybe we just need to get, if there's, let's say, I don't know, looks like 4 seats in each row, then maybe we'll sample 5 of them. So we'll use the row numbers, and we'll use a random number generator to select 5 row numbers. Then we'll give each passenger in these rows the survey. And this one is going to be our cluster method. So notice, again, since we have a bunch of groups here, our row numbers, but we're not selecting all of the groups, right? We're only getting representation from 5 of the groups. This does not sound like stratified, right? What we are doing is we're taking some of the groups and giving every single person in that group. And that's what we call cluster.